The word yama means restraint. So it's more like a vow. And the system of yamas, especially the yamas, is taken directly from Jainism, which was a religion in the axial age about, I think that these ideas came about 500 BC, but probably earlier than that, right? But literally all 5 of these yamas are plucked straight out of Jainism. Don't forget that yoga was born in the Gangic plain, the Indus Valley, where there were many, many religions. Jainism, Buddhism, and all these different forms. The word Hinduism can't even be applied. That was created within the past couple hundred years. The British colonials did that because the religions were so complicated, they just needed to put a name on it. So anyway, there are so many philosophies that they were all talking to each other, right? And in fact, there are copies of the Yoga Sutras that you can see that went all over the world at that time, that were influencing all different kinds of thought a little bit later. So the first of the yamas, how we relate to others, remember, is ahimsa. Ahimsa. The word ahimsa comes from ah. When you see the letter A in Sanskrit, a lot of times it means not this. So it's a negation. Himsa is harming or violence. Ahimsa is the cessation of harming or violence, the stopping of harming or violence. So ahimsa is non-harming. A lot of times ahimsa is, kind of described as vegetarianism or not hurting animals, things like that. That's certainly part of it. But ahimsa is really complex and it just goes to the very core. And this is amazing. So I've been practicing yoga since I was 12, so 25 years, right? And can I just say, I love going down the rabbit hole in yoga. I love studying the texts. I love studying the theories. I love studying the philosophies. I'll tell you something. I keep coming back to ahimsa. Like, you don't actually need to go much further than this one. If you understand ahimsa, or if you just remember that there's an invitation to come back to ahimsa, then you're good. Like, you get it. That is a lifetime of practice. Because think of all of the ways that we harm ourselves. Think of all the ways that we harm each other. Isn't judgment a form of warfare? Aren't our thoughts used as weapons against each other and against ourselves? Shame and violence and hiding from ourselves, right? So let's take a moment. I invite you to take a moment, maybe a few minutes here, to write. If you don't want to write, you can close your eyes and meditate, which is what I'll do. But if you have a piece of paper and a pencil or something to write with, or your computer, give yourself a moment or two just to think of the forms of violence that just come to the top of your head and how that feels in your heart. So let's close our eyes, or let's write, and let's take about 2 minutes just to explore, to notice what we notice in a practice of ahimsa through this lens. And how does it make your heart feel? And what is the antidote? Satya means truthfulness, or abstaining from dishonesty toward yourself and toward others. This brings us to the conversation of the ego for sure, right? Because when we're honest with ourselves and we're not making a wuss of our ego and we're not diminishing our inner truth, then how much power do we have? And can you see that Satya, without ahimsa first, can be and usually is a form of violence? So if you're using honesty, but it's not compassionate, isn't it a kind of violence? So honesty with where you are, honesty with who you are, honesty with your own internal process, honesty to say, things suck right now, and they don't have to be great right now. You know, honesty to say that makes me feel vulnerable, or I don't know how to navigate this, that, or the other, right? It's a very complete and complex teaching, just like ahimsa. It's a form of asceticism, isn't it? Because you're staying so true with who you are that truth is, it's a form of asceticism. It's a form of pulling yourself inward. Yeah. So you have to come from a place of compassion so that honesty can land within your heart and actually be helpful to you. The next yama is asteya, which is not stealing. And the reason I'm going through these two together, and I'm going to go through the next one also in this little section, is because similarly, what you're doing is looking at your own process with the world around you. Not stealing, right? Asteya. Not taking from others. So timeliness, showing up on time. You're not stealing somebody's time. You're not stealing somebody's space. You're not stealing somebody's energy or property, right? So one thing that has been a huge process for me this year, my biggest practice has actually been a practice of asteya, not stealing somebody else's process, which is the exact same dialogue as somebody is on their path. I want it to look different. I want it to look better. I think that if they only just worked on this one thing inside themselves, they could be happier. Right? Who am I to steal somebody else's process? Now I can make suggestions, especially if I'm asked, but for me to put my ethics onto somebody else, that's ahimsa. That's I've just crashed and burned in ahimsa. I've crashed and burned in satya and in asteya. So we want to steal each other's processes, not because we're bad, but because we think our way is better. And that's not so true, is it? We can be helpful guides for each other without having to steal from each other. And the yogis actually dealt with asteya very rigidly, I will say, in the sense that they literally gave away everything they owned, right? I will take just what you give me, even if, like the Buddha himself, it is said, was eating moss and was eating a single grain of rice because he was such a perfect ascetic. living off in the forest, not stealing from anybody, not stealing space, not stealing energy. I won't, I'm going to be in such a pristine practice of all this. And in his enlightenment, he realized his error, really. He saw that's not what this teaching is teaching, is it? Like, it's not give it all away. It's just, and this actually comes to aparigraha, which is coming up, which is non-coveting. But we're the ones that know if something is draining us or feeding us energetically, if something is helping us materialistically or not. And so these all link together, right? I love Asteya. I think that this is a gem of a Yama, right? I know when something is off within me. Usually it's because some part of me feels like, wow, did I just steal from that situation? I get very excited about things, and I obviously externally process. So, I'll talk and interrupting, man, Asteya. We're all on our own process, right? So there we go. We're in our own process. And it's okay to be in your own process, but honor the process. Brahmacharya means, in no uncertain terms, sexual celibacy. So how do we bridge that ancient teaching with today's world? Well, now we can actually go into that next avenue and say, okay, let's look at my relationships. Where am I leaking my energy? And where am I not? If I'm in a relationship, am I committed? Or am I secretly maneuvering? Or, so it's non-adultery if you're in a relationship, and it's celibacy if you're not. But I will say that brahmacharya in this traditional model is one of the early stages of the life of the spiritual aspirant. And I have it written down in my piece. I write extensively, so I have writings on every single yama and every single niyama from a non-dualistic perspective, from a existential philosophical perspective. And I have it written out what these different phases of life are. Brahmacharya really relates to the young pre-family phase of the spiritual aspirant's life traditionally, right? They are a brahmacharya when they are studying, they are memorizing the sutras, they're not yet married, so this is a phase of life. And then you go into the next phase, and then you go into the next phase, and then you are in that last phase of your life where maybe again you're celibate, but it's for different reasons. It's, you're just kind of done with it. And you're back to studying in a different way. So I like the modern interpretation of how do we leak our boundaries with other people? How do we spill that bright sexual energy that we have into the world around us? And are we doing it in a way that is good for us? You don't want to turn this one into a moral commandment. You don't. Because this does not have anything to do with somebody's judging you if you go and you have empowered sex with 5 or 10 different people. It's really not about that. This is about you listening within your heart and saying, is this relationship giving me more? Or is it giving me less? Like, am I expending energy to have this relationship? Or is this relationship feeding me? And am I feeding this relationship? So do we have a mutual support? And I can only say that from the tantric perspective, which is, not, by the way, California Tantra, California Tantra is all about sex, but real Tantra is actually a very complex, non-dual system where it is taught that every single one of our relationships with those around us can make us more awake, more alive, and better. So, I've been married almost 13 years next month, and there's nothing like being in a long-term relationship with somebody and saying to them, does that serve your highest good? And having them reflect that to me. Because some little piece of me will be like reactive, don't tell me that. But isn't that what a real relationship is for? That I love you so much that when I reflect something to you, it's because I want you to be your highest self. I want you to be as purposeful and awake as you can be. And can I trust you to have that with me? So to me, brahmacharya is all about awake relationship, and that is practice. That's not easy. We can do that with our children, we can do that with our neighbors, we can do that with our siblings, we can do that with our parents, or not. If they are unwilling to play the game and they are unwilling to change their patterns, are you going to keep trying? Or is that spilling your vitality and your sexual energy by trying and trying and trying and pushing against a wall that is pushing back so hard that it just exhausts you, right? So maybe brahmacharya is teaching us to work in the brightness of relationship and to acknowledge when that is not working. It's not working. Like I'm taking myself out of this equation. It's not working. If at some point that changes, okay, I'm available to that, but right now it's not. So that's my take on brahmacharya, but let's not skirt the fact that classically it just means celibacy. I'm just unwilling to play that. So, and I think most of us are. I always go into these yamas and niyamas and I'm like, oh, this one's my favorite. Aparigraha is non-grasping. So at some point we're going to have to look at our desires, right? And not desiring things that are unnecessary to your life. So you can see how people who get pretty fundamental will just cut it all out, give it all away and, start wandering the forest, which is what the forest ascetics did. That's literally what they did. In fact, it was assumed that you would give it all away to become an ascetic. If any of you have ever read Siddhartha, that was the model that you would take. This was aparigraha. But do we really need to enact in these extremes in order to practice these yamas? Non-grasping and non-jealousy and non-desiring. Don't we have so much material that we can work on without even changing a thing? Like, nothing really needs to change in your environment. You can literally look around and be like, oh, I have plenty of stuff that I can work on right here, just exactly as I am with this particular topic of aparigraha, of not grasping. And this is where I will make a distinction, because this is an important distinction. Desire is kind of the big bad wolf in yoga, so to speak, right? Desire is really the root of so many issues that come up in the yoga practice and in yoga in general and in the self-inquiry process. You are always looking for your desires, because desire and fear are pretty darn close. They're two sides of the same coin, desire and fear, and that is what locks us into our individual self and away from this inward path. Desire is literally what keeps us engaged with the outer world. But there's two forms of desire. There is the desire that we're talking about, that we're trying to investigate. It's literally the entire spiritual practice. That's you looking at your desires. But there's also the desire for waking up, the desire to melt into the heart. And again, I'm going to quote one of my favorite teachers, Nisargadatta Maharaj, one of the great non-dualists. His book is I Am That. And this form of desire, he calls earnestness. He doesn't even call it desire, he calls it earnestness. So it is a subset of desire, but it's the desire that leads you back home into your heart. And most other desires, if it's not a desire for you to stay true to your heart, is actually projecting you up and out. It's literally the mechanism of Maya. That which deludes us is desire. Desire is like her favorite tool to keep us deluded, okay? So check your desires and you will have a pretty good idea of your self-inquiry process. And it's sobering when we look at our desires. You know, I find myself, even, if I can share this, in a transaction that I was starting to feel like really desirous of. And I wanted this thing to happen. And I kept having to check myself every day. Okay, hold on a second. Not my mind. Let me listen to my heart. Okay, my heart still says it's good. Okay, maybe, so we keep checking and we keep checking, because I'll tell you what, desire will creep in there. And if you can literally say, I'm happy and I don't need this situation to happen the way I want it to in order for me to be happy, then you're doing just fine, right? But the moment you start kicking on the inside and saying, that 4-year-old comes out and it's like, I have to have this thing, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Your ship has been commandeered. You're no longer holding the reins. So desire is a good one, and it's a hard one. And boy, does it hold us accountable, right? So keep listening to your heart, because I truly believe that the heart is that honest point. And does anybody ever have a feeling of physical connection with their heart? Like if something doesn't feel right, their heart will actually feel constricted or in pain, like an actual pain in the heart. So part of the yoga practice, in my opinion, is literally listening to your body's signals. Your body isn't just something that like you can open up and dissect. Your body is truly the same as your thought and emotion landscape. It's just a little bit, you're looking over here and you see one thing here, and over here you see the body, but they're all connected. And we're going to dive into this topic more and more and more and more. But I find that desire is a great gift and a great tool, because it really reminds us where our physical body is. Oh, I feel that. That's a constriction. So take those cues from your body, because that's intelligence happening right there. And when we fall off the path, it is a gift, because we are learning and we are interacting with ourselves. As it is said in one of the great texts, the ground that trips you is the same ground that holds you up. So the ground that is supporting you is the same ground. If you fall, you fall. But it's the same thing. So these are our 5 yamas.